ओम नमो भगवते रामकृष्णाय. Welcome all. Today we have a special lecture on governing principles of democracy in ancient Sanskrit scriptures based on Shruti Smriti Itihasa Mahakavya. As a token of our reverence to the holy Sanskrit scriptural heritage of India, we begin the program with Sanskrit words and then move on to the English lecture. At the outset, I request our revered Vice Chancellor Maharaj, Srimad Swami Sarvottamanandaji Maharaj, to please come to the front of the auditorium. Swagatam Sarvesham Atra Vishishta Vyakhyana Sabhayam Vishwavidyalaya Anudana Ayogaha UGC Kamschana Vishwavidyalayan Namagraham Chitva Ayojayati Abharatam Idam Vishishta Vyakhyanam. Aishamaha Pancha Saptati Tamaha Samvatsaraha Asmakam Rashtrasya Ganatantrasya. Tatra Vishwavidyalayeshu Sanchiteshu Ramakrishna Mission Vivekananda Shaikshanika Shodha Samsthanam Api Vyakhyanamidam Adya Evam Rupena Ayojayati. Bhagavataha Shri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa Devasya Jaganmatuhu Shri Sarada Devyaha Yugacharyasya Srimad Vivekananda Swami Padasya Cha Divya Leela Kshetrasya Parama Pavitrasya Beluda Mathasya Samipe Pratishthapitam Idam Shodha Samsthanam Manita Vishwa Vidyalayattvena Vidyam Upasevate. Panchottara Dvisahasratama Varshe Pratisthapite Asmin Shodha Samsthane Bhagavataha Kripaya Studhiyam Mahatmanam Sannyasinancha Ashirbhihi Anavaratam Vidya Yajnaha Pravartate. Adyatanasya Vishishta Bhashanasya Vishayaha Bhavati Shruti Smriti Hasa Mahakavyadishu Prachina Samskrita Shastreshu Vidyamanani Ganatantrasya Adhara Bhutani Tatvani Iti. Adya Dvavimshaduttara Dvisahasratame Varshe November Masasya Dvavimshe Dinanke Sayankale Atra Sakshadrupena Vidyudantarjala Madhyamena Cha Iti Etadubhaya Prakarena Prachalati Asmin Karyakrame Bhavatam Sarvesham Swagatam Vyaharamaha. Anitara Sadharanim Bharatiya Rajyatantra Paramparam Adhikritya Pravartam Manaha Ayam Karyakramaha Pavana Veda Mantra Pathena Upakramsyate Shanti Mantrasya Krishna Yajurveda तैत्तिरीयारण्यकगतस्य मेधासूक्तस्य च पाठेन अस्य आरंभः भविता। वैदिक मंगलाचरणं विधित्सन्तः रामकृष्ण मिशन विवेकानंद शैक्षणिक शोध संस्थानस्य संस्कृत दर्शन विभागस्य छात्राः वेद पाठार्थम् आहूयन्ते वेदिकाम्।
श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः। हरिः ओम। सहना भवतो सहनौ भुनक्तो सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ओम शांति शांति शांतिः। ओम यश्छन्दसा मृषभो विश्वरूपः छन्दोभ्योऽध्यमृतात् सम्बभूव समेन्द्रो मेधया स्पृणोतु अमृतस्य देवधारणो भूयासम् शरीरं मे विचर्षणं जिह्वा मे मधुमत्तमा कर्णाभ्यां भूरिविश्रुवं ब्रह्मण कोशोऽसि मेधया पिहितः श्रुतं मे गोपाय। ओम शांति शांति शांतिः। ओम मेधा देवी जुषमाणा न आगाद् विश्वाचि भद्रासु मनस्यमाना त्वया जुष्टानुदमाना दुरुक्ता बृहद्वदेम विदथे सुवीराः त्वया जुष्टऋषिर्भवति देवि त्वया ब्रह्मा गतश्रीरुतत्वया त्वया जुष्टश्चित्रं विन्दते वसुसानो जुषस्वद्रविणो न मेधे मेधां म इन्द्रो ददातु मेधां देवी सरस्वती मेधां मे अश्विनावुभावा धत्तां पुष्करस्रजा अप्सरासु च या मेधा गन्धर्वेषु च यन्मनः दैवी मेधा सरस्वती सामा मेधा सुरभिर्जुषताग स्वाहा मेधा सुरभिर्विश्वरूपा हिरण्यवर्णा जगति जगम्या ऊर्जस्वती पयसा पिन्वमाना सामा मेधा सुप्रतीका जुषन्ताम्। ओम शांति शांति शांतिः।
कृष्ण यजुर्वेदीयं मेधा सूक्तं शांति मंत्रं च सस्वरं पठित्वा मंगलं विहितवद्भ्यः छात्रेभ्यः धन्यवादाः। अस्मन्मध्ये समुपस्थिताः सन्ति अस्य मानित विश्वविद्यालयस्य कुलपतिचरणाः वाइस चांसलर पूज्याः श्रीमत् सर्वोत्तमानंद स्वामी पादाः संगणक विज्ञान शास्त्रे कृतशोधकार्याः प्रतिभा संपन्नाः श्रीचरणाः अवरेषु छात्रेषु अध्यापकेषु स्नेहशीलाः सदुद्यमेषु सदा प्रोत्साहनपराश्च कार्यान्तरेषु सत्सु अपि कथंचित् परिकल्प्य समयम् अत्र समुपागतानां स्वामी पादानां प्रणति पुरस्सरं स्वागतं व्याहरामः। सभायां व्याख्यातृरूपेण उपस्थितायाः सम्मान्यायाः श्रीमत्याः नीरजा गुप्ता महोदयायाः स्वागतम् उदीरयामः। अस्मद्विश्वविद्यालयस्य रांची नरेन्द्रपुर कोयम्बत्तूरु प्रभृति परिसरेभ्यः अत्र साक्षात् विद्युदन्तर्जाल माध्यमेन च उपस्थितानां यतीनां मान्यानाम् अध्यापकानां प्रियछात्राणां सेवाव्रतीनां कर्मचराणां अन्येषां च सर्वेषाम् अत्र समागतानां हार्दं स्वागतं व्याहरामः। साम्प्रतं श्रीमत् सर्वोत्तमानंद स्वामिनः अस्य मानित विश्वविद्यालयस्य कुलपति चरणान् आशीर्वचनैः अनुगृह्णन्तु इति अनुरुन्धे।
नमः श्री यतिराजाय विवेकानंद सूरये सच्चित सुखद स्वरूपाय स्वामिने तापहारिणे. Good evening, everyone. I extend my hearty welcome to Professor Neerja A Gupta, Vice Chancellor, Sanchi University. The topic of today's lecture is democracy in ancient India. We all have heard about the name of Vaishali Ganatantra. Vaishali Ganatantra had democracy even before this idea of democracy took any form in Western countries. Though finally the Vaishali Ganatantra lost to other kingdoms of those times, probably Ajashatru. But even then, this loss does not mean that the idea of Ganatantra, the idea of democracy had fault in it. Because in this world, you know that any losing side, the ideas, the system of beliefs, they all are buried with the losing side. But that does not mean that the idea and the system of beliefs, they themselves are at the fault. In fact, the system of democracy that was envisioned by Vaishali Ganatantra, that those medieval, those ancient times, it was far, far advanced compared to the beliefs of those times. It was actually, I think it was even around Buddha's time, like 500 BC. And in fact, no, I can say that even now also, the ideas that were envisaged by the Vaishali Ganatantra, they are far, far advanced, because even now you will understand, if you look at our modern forms of democracy, they are not perfect form of democracies. Lot of this republic ideas are mixed with the democracy, but whereas they had the democracy in the purest form. Each villager of Vaishali Ganatantra was part of the decision-making process. Actually, that is why they lost. But that does not mean that the idea itself was at the fault. In fact, it was very much advanced, and even now we are not ready for that kind of democracy. Anyway, I am not an expert in political science or even ancient history of India, and that is why we have experts talking about this topic to you today. Professor Neerja A. Gupta will enlighten us how this idea of democracy was practiced in our ancient India. Thank you very much. I welcome Professor Neerja A. Gupta.
समयोचितैः प्रोत्साहकवचनैः सभां भूषितवद्भ्यः स्वामिचरणेभ्यः नमनपूर्वकं धन्यवादान् अर्पयामः। भोपालनगरस्थे सांची बौद्ध भारतीयाध्ययन विश्वविद्यालये यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ बुद्धिस्ट इंडिक स्टडीज इत्यत्र कुलपति पदे विद्याव्रतम् आतिष्ठमाना प्रोफेसर नीरजा महाशया आंग्ल साहित्ये प्राप्त शोध पदवी का रशिया भाषायां कृतोच्च स्तरीय शोध कार्या शास्त्रीय संगीते नृत्य कलायां च कथक संप्रदाये कृत परिश्रमा विद्यते। 36 वर्षेभ्यः अधिक कालात् उच्च शिक्षणे शोध कर्मणि च व्यापृतया अनया 20 ग्रन्थाः विरचिताः। महोदयया बहुषु विश्वविद्यालयीयासु परिषत्सु अध्ययनादि रूप परिषत्सु बोर्ड ऑफ स्टडीज इत्यादिषु विविध गोष्ठीषु च सेवा विहिता। सम्प्रति गुर्जर राज्ये भारत शोध संस्थानस्य प्रधान संयोजिका चीफ कोऑर्डिनेटर च विद्यते। अस्मन् निमन्त्रणम् अंगीकृत्य महोदया मुख्य व्याख्यातृ रूपेण अंतर्जाल माध्यमेन समुपस्थिता। महोदयायै रामकृष्ण मिशन विवेकानंद मानित विश्वविद्यालये पुनः हार्दं स्वागतं व्याहरामः। श्रुति स्मृतीतिहास महाकाव्यादिषु प्राचीन संस्कृत शास्त्रेषु विद्यमानानि गणतन्त्रस्य आधारभूतानि तत्त्वानि इति भाषणस्य अद्यतनस्य विषयः। As we already drew your attention to, we began this program in Sanskrit language as a token of our respect to the holy ancient Sanskrit scriptural heritage. Now we move on in English language. I once again cordially welcome Professor Neerja A. Gupta, Vice Chancellor, Sanchi University of Buddhist Indic Studies, to deliver the talk on governing principles of democracy in ancient scriptures, ancient Sanskrit scriptures, based on Shruti Smriti Itihasa Mahakavya. Welcome, ma'am. It's over to you.
Sadar Namaste. Anugrahito Asmi. Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Swamiji Sarvottamanandaji Maharaj of Ramakrishna Mission Educational and Research Institute, Reverend faculty members, dear scholars, and all holy souls who are attending today's session. Thank you so much for making it possible to appear before all of you on this very, very technical subject. And as been rightly said by Sir, that no one of us is actually an expert on this issue. But at the same time, this is such a vital phenomena of our journey of civilization. Then time and again, we have to go back and visit our past so that we continue our bonding, our knowledge systems, our understanding of different functioning of the society. And in the society, as we know, the Raja and Rajya have been very important features. And then as we understand with the today's modalities or terminologies, they have their own prototypes. So we call somewhere authoritarian, somewhere democratic, somewhere blended. How were we functioning? Was it absolutely monarchical? What is a monarch? What is a Rajya? So many questions are there, and there are so many modes to receive the answer. So the students of history, they actually dive into history and try to find out the answers. For that, they visit the archaeological sites or scriptures or accounts in different canons, texts, and these are the basis. For today's lecture, I have taken up the scriptures as the base, and as we know, we had a parampara of Shruti, Smriti, Mahakavya, and Bhashya. So I have taken these into my account, and to make it more easy and more understandable, I'm going to use a PowerPoint so that we can quickly surf through the things, we can understand, and there is a chronology also to see what are the features. So I'm starting with this PowerPoint. I need some confirmation if it is visible. I hope it is visible. This is a very latest dialogue or discourse or report, which is a bit shocking for us. In a recent survey, we have been put at 46th position in the democracy index in the world, and they have actually 4 types of democracy shown to the world: full democracy, flawed democracy, hybrid democracy, and authoritarian democracy. And it is said India is a flawed democracy. So standing at 46th point on the 5 pointers, and these 5 pointers are electoral process and pluralism, functioning of the government, political participation, political culture, and civil liberties. Interestingly, when we check democracy, it is much more than this. There is freedom of press, there is equality, there is the welfare of all the people. I wonder why only these pointers have been judged. Or is it the topsy-turvy analysis of democracy that certain things have to put up at the top? So in this background also, it's very important to understand where does India stand with the democracy. Why others should lose out? Why we are not convinced with this report, as well as why we are going back to our scriptures. These are some of the pointers. See, we have a tool to map the periodic past. And our tool is the scriptures, because our scriptures were not written in a day or in one period. So time and again they were produced, they were written, and commentaries were constantly appearing on those. So we can map our periodic past through these occasional revelation of the truth. Then we have a cultural and civilizational history, which actually matches with our political history. So we are not vertical, we are horizontal. Of course, we consider ourselves to belong to a glorious past, and this glorious past has always prepared us for the future. And that is why scriptures and texts are so important. I'll come to the problem immediately. You see, the problem with us is neither we own our own attributes, our own belongings, our own systems, our own modalities. And secondly, we don't counter also. Suppose XYZ association has put us at the 46th number. Do we really counter what is their sample size? What are their fields? What are their prerogatives? Who is sponsored them? What is their field-wise breakup? We don't counter. Then there are small stories which are spread out, and then at the convenience we call them individual or maybe sectarian. So we don't know how do we approach to our past. But the last thing is, we are so apologetic in our wisdom. There are so many proofs, so many specimens, the canons are there, the texts are there, the scriptures are there, the commentaries are there, but we are so apologetic that no proof is sufficient to us. We doubt on each and every proof. So on this background, what I have done is that we have to go back to the Vedic tradition, and we need to look into what is the soul of democracy. Why even the monarchical states we call that there was democracy. So there has to be some pointers. As we saw in this report also, they have kept Britain in the full democracy. Now, Britain, we know, is a monarchical country. We still have monarchs over there. So what are those pointers which would claim that it is democracy? So the first thing is that the villages were ruled by committees or sanghas. So it was not directly one person ruled, but the power was delegated, and the delegation of power was to the local bodies. And whatever terminology we use today in our system, the same terminology is found. Sangh, Samiti, Paur, Gan, Shreshthi. In all these traditions, we find a continuation of the terminology, Sumantra, Mantri, Nyay, like that. So we have not deterred from our basic thought that what for is a Rajya. Then whosoever understands the Vedic tradition, the latitude of philosophy, we know that the first and last thing is the spiritual progress as far as Bharat is concerned. So when we say spiritual progress, it would come only with the promotion of the freedom of an individual. And when there are other cultures and other religions, they have been amalgamated. There is an assimilation with the same form of freedom, then tolerance and acceptance. So these should be the main pointers of democracy. These are some of the list of the scriptures which have been my primary sources. There are about 187, to be specific, 187 scriptures I have gone through. This is something very interesting. When we reach out to Mahabharata, in Mahabharata, there are mention of about 200 places, 200 Rajya, which were Ganatantra, which were republic. Now, if we claim that there are 200, minimum 200 Ganatantra in the Mahabharata time, then our youth, today's youth, they say, okay, but Mahabharata is a scripture and there might be some imaginary places and they might have coined some Ganatantra whom later Arjun or Nakul or Sahdev or Bhim, they have won over. So what is the reality in that? That is why I have prepared this table, that these are the regions which were mentioned in Mahabharata as Ganatantra. Now, how do we substantiate they were realities? Because either their coins are retrieved or we find them in the Samudragupta inscriptions at Allahabad, or there are contemporary literary mentions, or we find the archaeological truth in the excavations and other forms. So suppose we pick up this Hirdaya Guha and Andhakavtya. Now, these are the places in Afghanistan today with the name of Hadda and Dandakut, and the coins in Western Himalayas and Hindu Kush we found from 2nd BC to 4 AD. And these coins were inscribed saying that coins are released in the name of people. So even the king's name is not mentioned on the coins. Similarly, these are the list of places. Then how do we substantiate they were real, and what is the natural today's position about that? These are 3 slides. I'm not reading out the same thing, but this one study in Mahabharata shows that the provision of republic was so very in practice in Mahabharata Kal. That's why they have been mentioned in Mahabharata. Many of the places have their mentions in the Greek writers. Many of the tribes, they say they have resisted Alexander's invasion, and many have later mentions in Kautilya, in Panini, in many other Himalayan texts, in Greek texts. So we find there is a continuity of the place, and we can actually locate them geographically even today. So these are the republics mentioned. Of course, as Sir mentioned, Vaishali was one of the Buddhist republics. There are so many others, Sakyas, Malas, Lichvi, and we not only as in India, but the Greek scholars have also recorded them in their text. So there is a double check on the truth that yes, they were over there. And we can actually found them in many travelers' accounts, in Western traveler and Indian traveler, Oriental writings like that. One thing is very important. What we call monarchy was never a privilege, and we know that. These are some of the accounts that have been mentioned in our Puranas, in our Ved, in our many other texts, where the king was never given a throne just because that person is the son of the king. They had to perform. So it was never a privilege. These are the accounts like we have in Mahabharata, Vanya is there. Then the first ever king, they say, was Indra, because when demons and they were fighting, they were war, they realized that why Devtas were losing out the battle, because they didn't have any king. So it is said the first king was selected or maybe appointed as Soma. Soma was the first king. Similarly, these are the accounts we find from Mahabharata and from other texts, how one particular monarch was put on the throne of the king. Again, we all know the story of Janmajaya, that he was a mere child, a small child, when Parikshit was doomed for the death, and how Janmajaya becomes king. Then Rudra Dama is also another mention. This is how we find in Raj Tarangini, in Mahabharata, in other scriptures, how the king was not only by legacy but also by the choice of the people. We all know in Bengal in 8th century, the Pala dynasty, we have the incidents of Gopala Raj. I'm not going again and again with these because these are the repetition, only the names have been put here to show that not only one text of one time, but subsequently many texts of different periods, they have substantiated the truth that a king was the people's choice. If the king doesn't perform, that what happened, I'll tell you in the next one. In Atre Brahman, that is a part of Vedas, these type of Rajyas are mentioned. I'm sure we all know the types of Rajya, out of which Swarajya is a very important form here for our discussion, because that brings in people at the center. And as we know, the Dharma Shastras, they mentioned that king would look at the Praja as Praja Vishnu. That is, people are the God and they have to serve God like that. And how the Janarajya was mentioned, Jananam idam janam, janam cha tadrajyam cha janarajyam. The people, they form the kingdom, and the people's kingdom is called Janarajya. These are the benchmarks, that there is no absolutism, there is no arbitrariness. The happiness of people is the basic law. Then, of course, how to derive law. So all the three parts, the executive, the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary, they are very well mentioned in the scriptures. Will show them in the subsequent slides. The most important thing is the king was not to legislate. The laws were not formed as per the king's wish, but there was a parishad which will form, like we have parliament today. And equality before law, we know it's foremost. So there is no king's son or king's brother or queen's parents or someone in the relation who would be saved from the wrongdoings and the punishment. Again, the protection was very important thing. Then the people's code, the mobile codes, the review codes, they were very well established, and there were laws how to establish. We'll see in the subsequent slides. These democratic values, they have been very well established time and again, and one after the other text. The basic thing is, in the Smritis, it is said that the civil rights and criminal liabilities are called Vyavahar Dharma, and constitutional law is called Raj Dharma. Dharma had been the basis. Dharma was to be performed by everyone, but then dharma, which is being performed by the state, will be called Raj Dharma. We all know in our constitution, Article 13 is based on these fundamental rights, and the foremost fundamental right is to perform the duty. So duty and rights are integral. We find many incidents where the documents have the written laws like the constitution. So wherever there is a confusion, one can go back to the scriptures or to the documents to find out the processes and other procedures. This is a very well established what we say definition of dharma. As we know, dharayati iti dharma, but it says abhyudaya nihishreyase sadhanatven dharayati iti dharma. So not only dharayati iti dharma, but sadhanatven dharayati iti dharma sachalakshan pramanabhyam chodhanat sutra itu vyavasthapita. They have to be well established also. All the parts of dharma have to be well established. Why it is needed? Because dharma is the mool. There are three things which they call trivarg: dharma, artha, and kam. They said this runs the world, this runs the universe. So how can a Raja not see these things? What are the three things? Dharma, artha, kam, but not always in this order. Somewhere earth is important, as we see in the Marxist theory. Earth is important. Somewhere calm is important. In a materialistic society, the wish, the will is more important, but somewhere dharma is important. But at the last, what is more important is the desire and the material wealth. If they are contrary to dharma, then they must be rejected. We may go in any order in Trivarga. Now, this Trivarga has been mentioned not only in Vedas, in what we say Panini, but also in Ramayana, in Mahabharata, in Arthashastra, in many Nitisar, Shukra Nitisar, Kamandaka Nitisar, Ravana Samhita, many mentions are there for Trivarga. So a king has to look after, as we see Ramayana, the essence of Raj Dharma is that rulers must conform to the rule of Trivarga, and then this Trivarga should be Samavibhaga. It cannot be as per the need or wish, somewhere more or less. Not going again to Raj Dharma, but Mahabharata is excellent in establishing what is Raj Dharma. But it started with Brihaspatya Sutra, where they say, Nitehe phalam dharmartha kama vapti. Goal of polity is, of course, the fulfillment of dharma, artha, and kam. But dharma, artha, and kam in the proportion is the job of Raj Dharma. So Raj Dharma is all amalgated dharmas. Therefore, Raj Dharma is the supreme dharma. Rajya is mentioned again and again, but that doesn't establish that if there is Raj, then there is democracy. But definitely we had a formulation of Rajya in the name of Rajya, Swarajya, Rashtra, Rashtranam, like that. Origin of the king, as we discussed, the very origin of the king itself is democratic, because Soma was made a king by all gods. So there was a unanimity in the selection of the first king. Not only that, like today we have the oath taking ceremony. This again is shown that there has to be an oath which is not only to be taken but also performed, and this happens at the time of Mahabhisheka, the coronation ceremony. The selection of the king is that it should be accepted by the people. If the people don't accept the king, then definitely there is some process which is to be followed. We are mentioning next, but there are mentions of the king, the parliament, and the Sansad, that is parliament. Then, of course, the Sabha and Samiti, we'll come to that again. When the king takes over, it is very important that the king is helped by some Mukhya Sachiv and the Pradhan Mantri. Unless and until he has people who would help him, there cannot be a good functioning government. Atharva Veda says, let all the people choose the king, and all human subjects from all 6 directions, they also should be under the control of the king, but the king should be donating knowledge and golden wealth, and then that should be to all royal devotees. So there is selection of the king by the people, but then once the king is selected, he just distributes or spreads out the not only knowledge but also the wealth. We come quickly to the units of governance as found in the scripture of a democratic kingdom. Each house, that is each greh, personal greh, is called Sadaspati. Then there is Gramapati, Gramani, because there is a gram where there is a house. So Sadaspati, Gramani, and above that is Kulp. Now Kulp seems the Kul like that, so it has to be the senior most person in the age. Parallel to Kul was Prajapati, And then Vrajpati. Vrajpati was above Prajapati, but below the king. So he is an elected official who is a joiner, who is a connector between the Prajapati and the king. The position of Vrajapati is higher than the Kul, and then king has a direct relationship with the Vrajapati, and so the king is called Vrajapit or the Raja. And from this Vrajapit or Raja, many other names have come for the king, and then it is Nrapati, Ganapati, Vishwapati, Janapati, like that. And Atharva Ved has a very detailed description about it, but the other scriptures we have mentioned the same terminology are Vishnu Smriti, Rigved, like that. This particular what we say functioning is when the king does not perform as per the expectation of the people, then there is a tradition called aparud. Arud is taking over the throne, aparud is dethroning. So people could dethrone also the kings, and then the king had to perform some yagya, as I have mentioned 2 instances here. Dushthiritu was detained, and then he was supposed to do Sautramani Yagya after that only, and that Yagya has very detailed ritual so that it purifies from the wrongdoings and becomes apt enactment in the throne again. Similarly, in Jamini Brahmana, it is said that Sindhukshit and Vaitavya, they are trained, they were also aparud, and then they performed Sama Viseshi Yagya. After that, they were throned again. And again, in Abhishek Mantra from Prajatantra, we find these. So Satpata Brahman and Atre Brahman, they have these traditions of aparud. There is a mention of removal of the king in Rigved as well. Of course, in Tatre Upanishad, again, they have this formation. Okay, now if we try to understand democracy in today's methodology, then there are 2 types of democracy, direct and indirect. We find in Vedas in detail the direct and indirect democracy has been mentioned. For direct democracy, the tools are public decision, undertaking, repatriation, and referendum. Indirect, we know parliamentary, presidential, federal, and unitary. Out of these, there are 8 foundations of success. Our scriptures have mentioned those 8 foundations of democracy, and then we find that the scriptures are very clear how the kingdoms should be run, so they don't remain purely authoritarian or monarchical. The first is public awareness. As we know that there are people who would go from place to create awareness among the people, so they don't want Agyani Praja Vishnu. They want a very highly enlightened, knowledgeable people, and this is the job of the king to spread that knowledge. So Grahana Gacha Grahpali Yathaso Vashanityam Vidatma Vidasi. They would go from place to place, and the women would also exercise their authority. We'll come to it when we talk about Sabha, Samiti, and Sabhavati. Ideal citizen. It's not that citizens don't have their duties, so they were well aware, they were conscious. Rigved itself says, Vayam Rashtre Jagrayamo Purohita Me Mayansi. So they have their duties towards the kingdom. So this is also one of the landmarks of democracy. Spread of education was definitely by the king. Not only that, whenever the king is in crisis, they would come down to ashramas to seek guidance or to see the path where he is going wrong. In Yajurveda, it's very well written, Tva Saraswate Tvaindrai Sutramane. So for the better mantrana, the king would come down to the Saraswati. Indra would come to Saraswati. Then the next is sense of national unity. Today, many people, they claim that where was India one? But it's all about that we are talking again and again of the Rashtra, of the Ekta, of the legacy of unison in the country. So I have mentioned here not the shloka, but the source, how the security and happiness of the people is the backbone of democracy. This could come when only there is a national unity and security. The rule of law, as we say, that everyone is equal in the eye of king. There is no discrimination between the relative and the people of that country. Then the two last one are local self-government. And the local self-government can happen if only they are divided into different geographical clusters plus the ministerial clusters. So Manu says that there is a vrind of 10 villages, then a mandala of 10 vrind. In Mahabharata, this 10 became 20. So Mahabharata, Dashamik, Manu, they all talk about the Gram Sabha and these type of formations of the local self-governments. And at the end, the eighth pointer is atmosphere of freedom. What we talk today, the freedom of speech or freedom of behavior or freedom to follow one's religion, these type of freedom were definitely there. There is a mention that it was chalked out after discussion in the Sabha, Samiti or Sabhavati. This is the economic and social equality the democracy talks about. These days, the highest talk is on this in our society. So we find there is a prayer. The sages have this prayer that just like the light of the sun, similarly, the material, this monetary success should also be there in our country. We find that there is a constant division of power. Parliament word is used many times in Rig Veda. Similarly, the unitary and federal democratic systems we find in Vedic Samhitas. There are many mentions of Gramini, Vihaspati, Sadaspati, Ganapati, Pradavivak, Pradeshtha, Parishad, Samharta, Vidath, like that. So these are all the units of powers, starting from the smallest to the biggest, and the largest is the nation or Rajya. When we talk of federal government of system, we have Sabha or Samiti, again calling to the Sansad. Sabha chama samitish chavata prajapate duhitaro samvidane. So it is very well mentioned in the Samvida that there will be a Sabha and there will be a Samiti. And Sabha is just like our Lok Sabha, and Rajya Sabha may be the Samiti. Then there is a close relationship between the two. I mentioned how many times we find this mentioned in our Vedas. Apart from Sabha and Samiti, we also had Sabhavati, that is the place and authority of women in the assembly was also mentioned. Not only Vedas, but also Kautilya, because we know that there is a difference between Vedas and Kautilya. Vedas are the theoretical text, but Kautilya has written Arthashastra, which was actually made into practice. So when we mention Kautilya, that means he has seen the birth of this practice, and so he mentions in Arthashastra as well as in Veer Mitrodaya, we find the mention of Sabhavati. Atharved and Shukraniti Sar again talks about the Sangha, about these different formations of local self-government. This we know, Sabha Chama Samitish Chavatam, a very famous shloka, Yena Sangacha Upamas Shiksha Charu Vadani Pitra Sangateshu. And then it goes on and say, let us move together in the same manner so that we create that let your mind rest in me, means in a unison, in a controlled manner in sunset, we can form the laws and we can run the country. If you see the shloka number 3, it talks about the Sansad as we have been talking. Again, Sangachadvam Samvadadvam Samvo Mananasi Janatam. It's a very famous sukta, and it talks about, may we distribute everything with equality, and maybe reflect together on all matter, maybe accept our humility together. So again and again, there is a mention of unison, which is the basic of the democratic value, that each one is having proper representation. The basic foundation of democracy is people's participation. So it goes down to the people's participation, and each one has its own place. Again, I'm showing you in Valmiki's Ramayana, again, they are talking about Por, Janpad, Sabha, Samiti, like that. So this text is again quoted here, but apart from this, Smriti, Kamandakiya, Nitisar, and Shukra Nitisar, they all talk about in the same manner. Now, Saptang theory says that a democratic state is divided into basically 7 portions, starting with Swami, who is the ruler, then Amatya, who are the ministers, then Janapad or Rashtra, that is like the territory which can be divided on the basis of population, then Durga, then Kosh, then Dand, Dand is the army, and Mitra are the friends. These are the Saptanga theory. A state must have these 7 features. Then Shukraniti Sar says there have to be 10 ministers, and these 10 ministers are, the highest level is Purohit, the last is Dyut, and Purohit and Dut have so many other positions: Pratinidhi, Pradhan, Sachiv, Mantri, Pradvivak, Pandit, Sumantrak, Amatya. Why I have to read this? You can all read this. The reading is that when we read, we find that actually even today, we use the same terminology in our democracy. So they sync with the spirit of democracy, this bifurcation. And these are called the prakritis or the kings, where superior and inferiors are positioned. Now, this is something about legislative. As we know, there are 3 functions of democracy: legislative, executive, and judiciary, which are independent. In monarchy, they are not independent. A king himself can play the role of all the 3. Now, Dharma Shastras say that a king can never formulate the law. It's always to the Parishad that would formulate the law. And many texts have mentioned this same way. And there is a procedure. They say, Shruti, Smriti, Sadacharah, Swasya cha priyamatmanah, Samyak Sankalpajah, Kamo Dharma Moolam Midam Smritam. This should be the order. The first we should refer to Shruti, that is the Vedas, then to Smriti, the written scriptures, then to Sadachar, the good conduct, and then the Vyavhar. Soyasya cha priyamatmanah is the Vyavhar, or anything that is approved by the society. On this basis, in this order, the law should have their sources. Then it is very well written that how the law should be made if there is a conflict between Shruti and Smriti. So they say Shruti Smriti Puranam Virodho Yatra Drishyate Tatra Shrotam Pramanant Yadhev Dhe Smriti Tvara. Whenever there is a conflict between Shruti and Smriti and Puran, then we should go to Smriti. That is the Vedas we have to go. If there is a conflict between 2 Smritis, then what should we do? Then it is very clearly written that we should go with the Vyavhar, what has been accepted publicly, the popular usages. We should formulate the law on that. This is very interesting how the file would move. If there is a new law which is to be made, what is the procedure of making the law? So this procedure is found in Shukraniti Sar. First is the minister or the priest or the envoy or the officer of the department who wants to make the law will take the main proposal. He would write their own views and send it to the prime minister. Then prime minister will also evaluate. If he finds appropriate, he would write their sadhu lekhanamasti. Then it will go to Sumant. Sumant will arrange a debate in the circle in favor, in opposition and all. If the amendments are needed, take the opinion. And after that, he would write Samyak Vivaritam. Then it would go to head. The head would again, if he is convinced with the appropriateness, would write Satyam Yathartham. After that, it will go to king's personal advisor. He would see and say evaluation done, Angi Kartum Yogyam. It will go then to Yuvaraj, the crown prince, and again it would evaluate the suitability, whether it is to be adopted, and then he would write Angi Kartavyam. Then it would go to Purohit, who approves and write Lekhyam Swami Matam. And then the king puts the seal and says Angi Kritam. So it's not arbitrary. In legislation, it has its own route through which the law would be performed, and then the law was made. Then we come to the executive. Now, of course, king is the executive head, but there are 5 yajnas. The king has to perform those 5 yajnas, and then we find that there are council of ministers. And people are, of course, Praja Vishnu. So they, and there is a mention of 18 paths, Ashtadash Sumargeshu Nibadhani Prathak Prathak. There are 18 paths, and in these paths, they declare that there is no one superior, no one inferior. We find an incident in Rajtarangini, very interesting incident. There is a cobbler and the king wants to create a highway over there. So his officers go there and they ask the cobbler to remove the hut. The cobbler challenges. He says, this is my right, my land. Why you are asking me? Then the king has to come himself and then say sorry to that cobbler, and then the cobbler gives way to the officers after charging appropriate money out of it. This can happen only in a real democracy. The king cannot just put the cobbler out anywhere. And similarly, we find the same constitutional system which Yudhishthira was advised to create. So 18 departments, again, we find mentions in Mahabharata, in Ramayana, in Panchatantra, in Kalidasasya Raghuvansha, in Shishupal Vadh. There are many repetition of this 18 path. Kautilya from 18, these are the 18 which have been taken from Manusmriti and Nilkantha. Kautilya goes to 25 departments. So these are the 25 departments. They're very interesting bifurcation of all these, as somewhere you can find, there are superintendent of armory, superintendent of weights and measures, superintendent of time measure, of tolls, weaving, agriculture, liquor, slaughterhouses, ships. Even the minutest department has a superintendent. So the whole society was under proper functioning. They know which is the department they have to reach out. So there are senior departments, there are what we say societal departments, like that. Now, at the end, we come down to the judiciary. Now, judiciary was very interestingly not given in full power to the king. The king would only look into only one type of cases, and that is sahas. Sahas means where some murder or something like capital punishment was needed. Otherwise, king was not to pass on the judgment. Here it is written in Narada Samhita, Dharma Shastra Puriskritya Pradvivakamate Sthita Samahit Matihi Pashvaten Vivaharan Kramat. The king would only act on the advice of the chief justice. there were 5 types of judiciary. One is the Kul. Kul means the family courts. Then the Shreni. Shreni, as we know, the business courts. Then the Gan. Gan are the larger assembly. Then the Adhikrit. Adhikrit were the courts appointed by the king. And then the Nrip. Nrip is the king himself. Then there were again 4 types of things. One is Pratisthita. Pratisthit is a stable, stationary court, but there was also Apratisthita, and that is the mobile court, which would move from village to village as per the need. Then the third was the Mudrata, where the court will have the king's seal and it will go and deliver the justice. And the last one was Shasita. Shasita is the king himself, that is king's court. So the gradation of the courts and judiciary was there. Not only that, they would also have panchayat dars. Panchayat dars are just like the fines on the road, like the traffic fines and some other punishment types. But of course, the corporal punishment was to be given by the king. This is another interesting type of court where we had the Punaranyaya. Punaranyaya is the appeal or review of the judgment. If someone is not satisfied, they can go back to the court again to claim for the Nyaya. This is how the kings would appoint the judges. The qualifications are that the king appoint one member of the court, an honorable man who has very high integrity, and then all versed in the sacred laws, prudence and all. Not only that, I forgot to mention that in legislature also there is a formation of the people who would form the law. So from the grahast, from the students, from the sannyasi, from this governance, from the king's court, there is a combination of the people who would form the laws. The last thing is, which is very important in democracy, is the fundamental right. So fundamental rights are mentioned again and again: right to happiness, right to equality, education, social security, protection, women. Many scriptures talk about that. And then they said that king should afford protection to combat the association of believers and non-believers. So Naigamas and Pashindis both, as Dharma Kosha says about it. I would end with this: Satyamev Jayate, truth alone wins. It's very significant why this should be the motto of India. Satyamev Jayate na Anritam Satyena Pantha Devayana. Because this particular sukta from Mundaka Upanishad says, Sabhavan Pravishtavya. People should enter into the assembly hall. Vaktavyam van samanjasam. They must speak everything in what we say in the right manner, in the samyak manner. Abruvan vapi naro bhavit kilvisha. Either who don't speak or those who speak lies, both those who don't speak as well as those who speak lies will be the sinner. That is why Satyamev Jayate has to be our motto, because they don't have to enter into the assembly hall, whether it is Vidhan Sabha or Vidhan Parishad or Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha. The liars should not enter there at all. And Manusmriti, as it rightly says, that who can be the parliamentarian, who can enter into the parliament? Those who are wise and intelligent. He should not stand upon his views, rather should consider the views of the other people. And all those present in the house, they should arrive to the same decision as his own. That only should be the behavior of the parliamentarian, as written in Manusmriti. And this is our perennial spirit of democracy, which shows that the Rajatwa is not a singular manner. sahaya sadhyam rajatvam chakramekam navartate. This is not a singular thing. A single wheel cannot move anywhere. So all others are just like the spokes of the wheel. We have to move together. I would like to end with Kalidas in a Vigyana Shakuntalam, when we all know Kalidas is known as the Shringar Kavi. A Shringar Kavi talks about Loktantra and says, Athva Vishramo Ayam Loktantra Adhikara. This Loktantra Adhikar is a Vishramo. It's incessant. It doesn't give me rest at all. It's just like all the time the sun rays, they fall just like the wind blows in the night. Similarly, for this earth, like the earth doesn't get tired in taking our own burden, similarly, a king has to bear the burden of democracy. With this, I end here. I would be happy if there are some questions. And once again, thank you so much for making it possible for me to present. This is not the end of it. I have not been able to incorporate everything because of my limitations and resources. I would be happy if you please progress with this subject all the more. Thank you. Pranam. Dhanyavad.
Thank you, ma'am. That was a wonderful lecture, an excellent presentation covering the entire gamut of Sanskrit scriptures, the basic governing principles of democracy as represented in the Sanskrit scriptures was succinctly and clearly put by Professor Neerja A. Gupta. We heartily thank Professor Neerja Gupta, and it was so appropriate that she ended with Athava Avishramoyal Lokatantra Adhikaraha, especially because of the word Avishrama. In the Indian culture, every being, every man, or every person who has taken birth in the Indian culture is supposed to always endeavor. It is represented by the word ashrama. Starting from a child up to the aged person in the home, everyone is expected to endeavor in his own way to keep up the dharma. That is why we have the ashrama system. So Professor has chosen the Kalidasa's words and has rightly cited that Athava Avishramoyal Lokatantradhikaraha. Once again, our hearty thanks to Professor Neerja A. Gupta. Now it's time for questions. If you have anything, you may please come with your question. This mic. No, just once again. Once again. Yes, yes.
Yes. When does this, solid democratic system, in the sense you spoke about in your lecture, when does this in our history become weak, and when it starts to fall apart? Because as you said, that right now the markers of democracy don't put us in a very good situation. While in the past, as just as back as the time of Bhagwan Buddha, we see that so much is written about. That means a very perfect system of democracy is in place. But right now we see that we have come down a lot. So when do you see that this has started becoming weak and this has started becoming eroding away?
Right. Very, very good question, Professor. I think the decline has started when we find the foreign forces to capture our land on the masculine part or with the muscular part. When we find more arms and ammunition, they try to capture our lands. So there was a struggle more. And how do you rule was has taken the back seat, but how do you save your land became the prerogative. So the decision making came out of legislation to the king, because it all depended on that, the king's decision, and then keep the decision secret, not let it out to the enemies, that what you are trying to plan and all. When this all started shrinking, this is how I feel that when they had more aggressions and more wars for the land, more this cosmopolitan, maybe capitalist attitude, that we find that the less people were involved in decision making. And once you involve very less people, the people or the person who is taking the decision would definitely become authoritarian, because he would not reveal his mind, but definitely he would try to get the work done, what he feels like. So it might be for the betterment of the state, or it might also be to fulfill the wish. It may go anywhere. It's just like the misguided missile, that you are doing it for the benefit of the nation or for your own benefit. So I find that is a marker that we can find that the democratic values has started diminishing.
So this means that it was in the troubled times that this kind of degradation took place.
Yes.
But do you see the possibility of the renewal of this system in the modern times?
Absolutely. You see, trouble is a very subjective word, whether you are counting the personal trouble or you are actually counting the trouble for your people. So when it became all the more subjective, when there was a danger for individual, I think that was the point when the democratic values lost their way. Again, the question is when we would regain it, when this subjectivity will be lessened or will go off. Because even today we find that, recent this emergency example or many other examples we can find around the world, they are called democratic states. Pakistan is called a democratic state. Afghanistan is called a democratic state. They have elections. The people choose their rulers even now. But that is subjective. What is that danger? Danger to the self, danger to the interest, or danger to the people? When the people will become center, then only these welfare forms of government will come up.
Okay, thank you so much.
Any other question? Any online participants?
Swamiji, if they have any personal comment or if they want to take the subject ahead, if there is something to the growth of the topic, that also be appreciated, not only questions.
Sure. I think we may end with this. We thank Revered Swami Sarvottamanandaji Maharaj, Vice Chancellor, Ramakrishna Mission Vivekananda Educational and Research Institute for gracing this occasion and giving his words of blessings in the beginning. We thank the resource person, learned Professor Neerja A Gupta, Vice Chancellor, Sanchi University of Buddhist Indic Studies, Sanchi, Bhopal. We thank the respected teachers who have assembled here offline. And we also thank all those participants from different campuses of our university who have attended online. And thanks to all dear students. Our thanks also to our dedicated staff of the university who have contributed for the successful organization of this lecture. With this vote of thanks, we'll end this program. As it is customary in our Indian tradition, we will conclude with the Shanti mantra from Vedas. We will all chant together, Purnamadaha Purnamidam.
Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Shri Rama Krishna Arpanamastu.